Lightly. A little hard. All right. I'll call this April 25th, 2014 meeting of the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission to order now. My name is Jeff Griggs, and I am chairman of the commission. At this time, I'd like to ask anyone that has a cell phone, if you would, either turn it off, vibrate, or silent. If you do get a phone call, I ask that you step outside the room to take that call. Today we have a few guests in the audience. Mr. Boyd Barker, Assistant Commissioner of the Department of Ag, is with us again today. And also former Assistant Director Nat Johnson, I believe, is with us today. And we're glad to have him as well. At this time, I'd like to ask Walter Cook, Captive Wildlife Coordinator, if he'd come to the podium, lead us in our invocation, followed by the pledge. And if you would, please stand with me.
May we discuss, pass, and act on things that will best serve the resources of this state and the citizens of this state. We ask, O Lord, that at the conclusion that all here return home safely. We pray this prayer in the name of your Son and our Savior, Christ Jesus. Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our nation's flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Walter. At this time, Ms. Barber, would you please call the roll?
Jim Bledsoe.
Here.
Harold Cannon.
Here.
Bill Cox.
Here.
Jeff Griggs.
Here.
Connie King.
Here.
Jeff McMillan.
Here.
Tom Rice.
Here.
Jeff McMillan. Jim Ripley.
Here.
James Stroud.
Here.
Trey Teague.
Here.
David Watson.
Here.
Jamie Woodson. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Barber, and I won't tell you what Jeff just said about you.
Thank you.
It's not, Trey said Jeff or Jeff. So I'm sure all of you had a chance to look over the minutes of the March 27th, 2014 meeting. If there are no corrections or changes, I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
Second.
Have a motion and second. Is there any discussion? Not all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion to approve minutes for March 27, 2014 passes. At this time, I'd like to ask everybody in the audience to, there'll be a tablet passed around the room. If you would, sign it. That way we'd have a record of you being here today. If you're here representing a group, please put that name of that group out beside it. Also, if you're in the audience today and you'd like to make a comment or have a question, I'd ask that you raise your hand, and once it's recognized by the chairman or chairperson of that committee, come to the front, state your name and the group if you are representing a group. And please direct your comments to the chair and not to the agency person that is presenting the deal or anyone in the audience. At this time, I believe Commissioner Cannon has a few comments.
I'll keep this brief. I appreciate it. Yesterday, at the latter part of the meeting, there were some comments made regarding the battle with us about hogs. And there were some insinuations that Commissioner Teague thankfully tried to point out, what do you mean about some situations? Those insinuations have been going on for at least 2 years, I believe, Director Carter. Because I remember 2 years ago this month, I got a call about it and called him while I was on the road, going to a meeting that happens this time every year. And those insinuations originally were directed against our agency. And it was clear that this is something our agency is not about, nor would we support. And it turns out that that was very true, that we were not doing the things that we were being accused of. And I would respectfully offer that at the end of the day, we'll probably find that some of the insinuations being leveled at another department at the federal level, that too will be proven not true. Folks have chosen to take an attitude, a posture of battle. That is their position, that is their privilege, and I respect that. The thing I am most proud of is how this agency, how this commission has listened to the concerns of that group. And as recent as yesterday, when Steve Nifong presented the amendment to the means proclamation, they'll be considered next month. We've been listening. Unfortunately, I don't know that we're being listened to, but that's okay. In the midst of that, I want to say I'm so proud of this commission for how they've conducted themselves throughout this. I think we've done right to the people. And to the staff, I doubly want them to hear, well done. And in the midst of us hearing that the hog population is down, I'm going, we must be doing a pretty good job, because that's our mission. And where we can eradicate them, we're going to eradicate them. And where we may not be able to, we're going to control them. And it's obvious that it's working. And if some of the insinuations were true, to the magnitude that's being presented, even if it was true, period, to the magnitude of one hog, there'd be some carcass somewhere littering the forest, and I've not heard that yet. And frankly, I don't believe it to be true. But people may believe what they want to believe. I want the staff to hear, well done, well done. You have done exactly what we all agreed to and charged you with throughout this process. The commission has continued to listen to comments from the public and have worked very hard to incorporate those. And I don't want that note from yesterday to cast any cloud or any doubt on the job that you all are doing. It has been remarkable. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cannon. Does anyone with the agency have any announcements before we start the meeting? Anyone on the commission like to say anything? Okay. If not, I'd like to ask Richard Kirk, Wildlife Manager in Region 2, if you'd make your way to the podium, sir. This is a rulemaking hearing before the Tennessee Fish and Wildlife Commission to consider amending Rule 1660-01-14, which deals with rules and regulations for refuge, wildlife management areas, and public areas. My name is Jeff Griggs, and I will conduct this hearing today. This is the order of proceedings, how we'll go. Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency staff will present information on the proposed rule amendment. Commission members will be permitted to comment and ask questions. Members of the audience will be permitted to comment and ask questions. Staff members and members of the audience wishing to speak should identify themselves before speaking. I reserve the right to limit comments and discussion, especially in cases of repetition. Mr. Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. This morning we've got several amendments to this rule. I'll go through them as they appear in the rule, and we'll just get started. The first proposed amendment deals with the use of alcoholic beverage on WMAs. If you'll look at the text, the wildlife management areas in yellow are currently in the rule, and we're not removing any of those. We are adding 33 other WMAs and 7 refuges. Let me say up front, this is not in response to anything hunters are doing. We have rules in place that prohibit hunters from possessing alcohol while on the hunt. This is in response to other users of the WMA, primarily late spring, all summer long. A lot of these WMAs are small. They don't have anybody assigned to them specifically or stationed there. Patrol of these areas primarily falls to the local county wildlife officer. The other larger areas will have a manager that's assigned to it present, that is commissioned, and part of his responsibilities are law enforcement. But these are large areas. What we're actually trying to prevent here are these areas becoming known as a spot on Friday or Saturday night that you can go to and drink, or on Saturdays, day camps where they can set up and in the course of the day drink alcohol. Now, as I said earlier, the rule's in place with the ones in the yellow, but the others are additive. Yes, ma'am.
Just a clarifying question, does this apply to voters?
The only, for example, Yanali Wildlife Management Area, the Duck River flows through it. The Duck River, my understanding, navigable water, so no, it wouldn't. The island or the bank or something like that, yes, it would. So if they get off on a shoal and set up a day camp, then yes.
Is this rule, is it just the use of alcohol? It doesn't prohibit the possession?
No.
Okay, thank you.
This is not in response to a problem.
Well, it's in response to issues in the past. To be honest with you, I can't tell you there's an issue right now that's we're embroiled in, but there have been issues in the past. The potential is there on some of these smaller areas where nobody's there all the time, and they're remote. I've got Tommy Edwards, who's the manager on Yanali here, if you want him to maybe address some of his issues.
Well, I understand you know, there's litter and there's hangouts and there's abuse and all that stuff, but I'm just thinking if a family went out to have a day camp all day long and they wanted to have a beer and they cleaned up after themselves and left, I mean, I know it's not a park, but I'm just kind of wondering how this is going to affect that, and if that's even what these are for, or what are we, at some point, we're going to have user fees that we're going to collect from these people that are non-consumptive users. Is this going to be something that's going to affect the use of this land adversely as far as those users are concerned? Without a problem already having manifested itself, are we causing fixing something that's not broken?
Well, I hope we're preempting a problem. It would, the use of the alcohol would be the use of it. So if they are on the bank of the river or on a shoal or whatever and using the alcohol, then that would be prohibited.
How many,
Yes.
you said we're adding
If,
33 WMAs and 7 refuges. How many WMAs are already? have
the
this?
ones in yellow, 8. The ones in yellow are already included. And Tommy's here. If Tommy,
Yeah, if you, this is a pretty simple question, I guess. Maybe I shouldn't, but if you're fishing and you pull over to the bank and you're sitting on a lounge chair or whatever, can you have a beer?
on the WMA, after this rule, if the WMA is listed there, then no. You could have it, you couldn't be using.
I mean, we already have laws, obviously hunting and alcohol. We already have boating under the influence laws, so, I mean.
Right now,
Seems
on
like
the WMA,
overkill.
you would have to be intoxicated or under the influence of a drug to be prohibited. This would prohibit use.
Why was it prohibited previously on the 8 locations where it is? How were they differentiated? What was the criteria by which they were chosen to
I would have to
the
refer
prohibition?
to one of the regional managers.
If you would, turn the lights back on, if you don't mind
I'm
for just a second.
Kirk Miles, Wildlife Program Manager in Region 3, and I can speak to the ones that we had on there, primarily Catoosa. Historically, we had day camp areas. Way historically, we actually had nighttime camping. And slowly over time, when you have those areas designated, I guess, they tend to be abused. And the abuse, can escalate to having to call the county out because you have a public intoxicated situation going on to trashing the area. So gradually over time, this rule kind of alleviates some of that. It's kind of like Richard described. Adding these would be preemptive to address some of the historical things that we've seen happen.
And I can add, Forks of the River Wildlife Management Area, I was a Knox County Wildlife Officer in the late 80s, and every spring, I would have an issue with that WMA, keeping people on Fridays and Saturday nights moved on. It was, you could get back up in there, and, I mean, you had to purposefully go in there to be in there. It was a good spot. They would find it and, you know, sit there in the car or outside the car and drink. And every spring, it would take me a while to get it known that that wasn't the place to be. So, and this rule helps that.
One thing that probably you should be pointed out for this rule is the very last part that says except in designated camping areas. So, for instance, on Catoosa, we have designated areas. When the hunters come in, if they set up their camper or whatever, stay overnight, stay for the hunt, they can have alcohol and drink beer in those designated camping areas. Now, not all of these smaller WMAs are going to have that, but we're not, that, you know, that exists on a lot of the bigger WMAs, these areas where you can bring alcohol in and you can consume alcohol.
It's illegal to boat under the influence, hunt, actively be hunting while consuming alcoholic beverages. It's illegal to drive under the influence. It's illegal to be publicly drunk in general. I feel like that we're penalizing the majority of responsible individuals on the actions of a few. I would think if people were getting citations or DUIs or BUIs, that would be more appropriate, in my opinion, than penalizing a guy that wants to have a shore lunch and drink 2 beers, you know, and him be doing something that he thinks is, or she thinks is completely legal, and suddenly they're not. I wouldn't be in favor. I wouldn't be in favor of any of them, honestly.
Tommy, do you have anything to add?
I'm Tommy Edwards, the area manager for Yanali WMA in Columbia, Tennessee. What I've seen over the years, especially on Saturday afternoons, Sunday afternoons, we'll have take for instance our dove field. We'll have a group of people, anywhere between 3 cars to up to 15, that congregate at an intersection where there's no parking allowed. They drag their beer coolers across our WMA and go down to the Duck River and party all day. These are individuals that are legal as far as age concerned, but they leave trash, broken bottles, and we get numerous calls. It's not the typical family that wants to go down there. I wouldn't take my family down there to enjoy the river or fish. So you got these areas where people are congregating, and we get people from all over the state, not only Murray County, but I've had vehicles from Rutherford County, Williamson. It just seems like the word just keeps getting out and out, and this is the place to be. And the only thing we can do is sit in the weeds and watch for them to drop a beer can and charge them for littering. So it's become a problem there, and so.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So they're parking in an area where it's illegal to park?
Yes, and we've had numerous calls from the county,
Right.
And they'll confront them, but they really won't haul them away.
Yeah.
So it's at a major intersection where, you know, you have cars up and down the road just parked, and people are walking across the WMA to the river at a shoal.
Right. It seems like, and I know in other areas where there are parking restrictions, I mean, folks get towed, folks are exited, and it seems like a little bit of that would go a long way to curbing that being a gathering spot, and would potentially, I mean, if you don't have a place to park, it's inaccessible, right?
And
And
as
so I'm
we-
wondering if that's been exhausted.
Well, we kind of, since it's a public road, we kind of let the county handle that, but they don't want to go forth with towing people. And as we police that area, they're finding other areas to go. So on Unali WMA, the whole Duck River takes in the WMA, and if there's a close road to that area, they'll park at the public road, pull their beer carts across the field, and go and drink.
Couple of educate me questions. Don't we have a proclamation or a rule regarding someone cannot be publicly intoxicated on our WMAs right now? Or is that not in place?
Yeah, they cannot be intoxicated or under the influence of a drug.
Okay. I share the concerns that are being expressed, and that is this rule, if it got passed today, then it goes, 30 days? Help me on the timeline, folks, before it becomes in effect. Ed, can you help me?
It really depends on the process it has to go through. If it's a rule, it could be up to a year before it goes into effect, just because of the process. But it takes at least 60 days after the commission passes it, after the Attorney General and the Secretary of State do the things that they're required to do. But all that could take up to a year.
I guess I'm wondering, how will this be implemented? Because I'm looking, in my neck of the woods, Tellico Lake and others there, that there's folks who have been doing exactly what Commissioner Teague painted. It's a family. They go out, somebody has beer, and now all of a sudden, one of our officers pulls up, and what happens then? Are they cuffed? Are they given a warning? What happens under this?
That's Pam McDonald, the
Come to
area
the-
manager at Laurel Hill. Yeah, if you would.
Come to the front, state your name.
My name is Pam McDonald. I'm a manager at Laurel Hill Wildlife Management Area. Like Richard said before, big lakes, navigable waters, those are considered completely separate. So Tellico Lake, unless it's an agency lake like Williamsport, Laurel Hill, Marrowbone, those are agency lakes, and they already have a rule that says you cannot even possess alcohol using state agency lakes. And of course, a hunter cannot possess or drink alcohol. A horse rider on a WMA cannot possess or drink alcohol. But people can come and just get out on a gravel bar and drink beer all day long. But then the people really, that to me is who we're working for, hunters and fishermen, people that use our area, they cannot. So it's a little bit of discrepancy there. But big lakes like probably Tellico and say Percy Priest, Old Hickory, they would still be allowed to drink alcohol. I would assume, I don't know about the duck blind. How's the duck blind going to be? That may be a separate. Do you know how?
Well, while hunting, I mean,
I vote no on them having a beer in the duck blind, sorry. That's
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the way this reads, those people who are on I can't say it. People who are on, they couldn't beach. I mean, they couldn't pull to the beach and sit on the sand.
that's the way I'm reading this.
and that is the way this reads. If you're floating the Duck River, navigable water, you're fine. When you pull over on the shoal or the bank where you're actually on the WMA, then this rule would apply.
As long as you're sitting in your boat on the water, you can still drink as long as you're stationary, anchored.
Oh, out in the water? I would think so.
I'm going to go back to my question, please forgive me. How will this be implemented? Because if we have a family that does exactly what was just laid out, they're in a boat, they pull up on shore, dad has a beer, is he going to be cuffed and taken away because it is prohibited?
He wouldn't be cuffed unless there was, there's
What's the
only certain-
penalty? Help me there. That's
he
what I
would be
don't understand.
cited. He could be cited if he drinks. He'd be written a ticket. I mean, unless there's one of the other extenuating circumstances that would call for us to have to arrest him, like if he was from out of state or, of course, had an arrest warrant.
Can I ask one other question? It sounds like the scenarios that we're having that are making this come before us are for public intoxication situations where people are just drinking big time. I mean, and forgive me, but that's the examples that keep coming up, that they pull the cooler down there and they're drinking all day. And we've got law in place that deals with that. I realize this may make it a lot easier as far as saying you can't drink here, but I'm having a disconnect. And since he had stepped up, I've got a feeling he's going to try to straighten me
The
out.
public intoxication law, the way I understand it, actually has a part in it that says you have to cause a disturbance. Like you have to cause an altercation or some type of disturbance is the way I understand it, just because you're drunk. I mean, now Metro PD may interpret it different, but the way I've always understood that law is there's something in there, like I've been working in law enforcement for 17 years, I've never written anybody for public intoxication.
I guess as an alternate, and then I'm going to hush after this, why couldn't we have a legal intoxication limit on this as opposed to keeping from somebody having that one beer? Just like in driving or whatnot. Ed, all yours.
If I could make comments, this is not about the rule per se, this is about the process, which is what I think you're asking. There are a series of laws, rules, regulations that all address alcohol and controlled substances. And depending on the level and depending on where it goes, some of it is officer discretion. But let me give you an example. Every TVA and every Corps of Engineer lakes, alcohol is prohibited on all their campgrounds. So it doesn't mean that you can't launch your boat and take it out into the lake and have the alcohol there, even though it's technically prohibited from being on that access area or in that campground. So everybody knows that, and that's an overarching statement, but that's the way it's been enforced since those lakes and stuff were put into place. When we get into the alcohol-specific laws, there's the public intoxication, which you're talking about, and a person has to present a problem to themselves or someone else. And doesn't necessarily, you could be arrested for public intoxication whether you're with somebody or you're just, causing a problem to yourself that it would lead to someone being hurt. It could be you, could be someone else. So public intoxication does not have a limit. So that just depends on officer discretion on when they think a person is under the influence to the point that they create that problem. Then you get to the other point where there is a legal limit that people cannot exceed, no matter what it is. And if they get to that legal limit that says once you're past that, it's up to you and everything turns over to the other side, you have to prove essentially why you weren't under the influence at that point. But you're not going to be arrested for that unless you create a problem, you cannot pass a field sobriety test, and all those things, and that goes to the legal limit. So just the process-wise, if you get to the point where you're arrested for possession or use, it's a citation like Pam was talking about. You're issued a citation like you'd be for not having enough life jackets or anything else. There's no physical arrest at all. It's a citation like a speeding ticket. If it escalates to something else, then it's a physical arrest, and at that point, yes, sir, a person would be taken to jail. And whatever it takes to get that person to jail is what would go on in that point. So you got the public intoxication, you got use, you got possession. So all those things are different, and they are addressed differently. Now, to the points that you're talking about, that's a decision y'all have to make. But where I'm putting words in Tommy and Pam's mouth here, but one of the things they're trying to prohibit is they have these areas, they're the area manager is the only person that has enforcement authority on that area, unless they can call in a local wildlife officer who may or may not even be in that county that particular day. So they have the choice of spending a lot of time watching people till they get to the point where they're causing a problem, and then they have to go there. So there's no time factor. They can't say, well, I'm going to go over at 4 o'clock and see how many people are causing a problem. They're going to get that call, or they're going to get it after the fact. And when it gets to the point where people are causing a problem, it's much more difficult to handle than if it's addressed on the front end. But the questions that y'all are asking about pulling up on banks and those kind of things, those are relevant questions, and those are the things you need to factor into all of this. I just wanted to talk to you about the process.
Last question, and it may have been said and I didn't hear, please forgive me. If this is implemented, are these areas going to be posted along the shoreline?
Within reason, obviously you can't post it, every piece of shoreline around through there. All our WMAs are posted as WMAs, and you do know when you're on a WMA for the most part, just like they are on the land side. But if you're asking, would you absolutely know that you're on a WMA? I've referred to them, but there's areas where you wouldn't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Last year when y'all brought this to us, and we were hearing about it, it was about the Duck River. What was the procedure that you compiled this list of other WMAs? Are there problems on all these, or are we just trying to make it uniform?
Well, we have 130 WMAs across the state. When we were evaluating this rule, each region did their own evaluation and proposed adding or obviously we had the chance to take off, but adding new WMAs.
So basically that was each region decided these were the ones they were having problems with and they needed to address it?
Or trying to preempt problems, yeah.
Okay.
I'm always trying to, we're always trying to help our officers do better and not impede their job, and I sympathize with their effort, but I think the unintended consequences of this, as Harold has asked a good question, you've got a family that's tubing and they've got beer or whatever, and they pull up on the shore to have a lunch and they get a ticket from a wildlife officer. That's not gonna put us in a very good light. And I don't see anything wrong with it. I think if we've got a problem in one or two places, we need to turn up the heat on them, but I can't support this. I think the unintended consequences outweigh the benefit, so.
Yeah, and you know what, I sort of look at it in a different way too. The officers are doing the best they can, and Tommy, I know you're concerned about the citizens, but there's another part that I'm hearing from you, and that's our resources. I mean, if they're gonna go tear our stuff up, and it's not like, a yard where you can fix it up. I mean, if they're cutting down trees and if they're acting up and tearing up our resources, that concerns me more than somebody going out and some hillbilly getting drunk. And I don't know how, this doesn't seem to address that. I guess it does, but it penalizes the family, like you're talking about. I wish there was a way, and maybe this is a stupid question, but it seems to me we need to look at this a little longer and a little more and have some information that we can cover a few bases. One is to make sure that you guys have the resources in the law that you need. But the other is that we don't penalize the majority of our citizens that uses our resources. And I don't know what that means, Chairman. I don't know if it means we table it. I don't know if we go back and look at it some more. I don't know what that, but it seems like to me what we're doing is that we're penalizing the majority of our citizens because of a few, but at the same time, we're also handcuffing our officers if we don't do this. And That's something I think we need to think about this and look at this in a little bit longer, if it's okay with you guys.
Cheryl, may I ask you a procedural question, please, ma'am? Is this a matter that we have to vote up or down on today, or can we postpone it to allow staff to revisit this, potentially addressing some of the concerns that we have?
I would suggest that in this particular case, you make amendments as you see fit to this amendment and vote it up or down as amended. And then in the future, we can come back with a new proposal, a new rule amendment. So take care of what's presented today, and then you know, if you want to instruct staff to look into it deeper and come back later, they can file a road notice again.
Do we have the latitude to postpone this today?
I think you can. I'm not quite sure about the procedure, to tell you the truth.
But
We can roll the rule till next month, but we'd be rolling the entire rule to next month.
There's more to this rule than just the alcohol.
Yeah,
There's a lot of other
there's
stuff
more
that hasn't
to
been
it.
presented, so there may be, we can look at the
You
rest
may
of that
wanna-
and then
Let's look at the
delete
rest of
an
it.
amendment that we don't like.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead. The next proposed amendment is, since we do now have a sandhill crane season, we're adding cranes to the.
I'm sorry, hold
Oh,
on, we have one more, Chairman Wilson.
I just want to make a comment, going back to what we've been discussing. I understand everybody's comments on this, but one thing, I think these 8 WMAs that are in different people's district, are different districts now. The ones that are in my district, I'm not getting a complaint from anybody that says that they can't have a beer on them. So I don't, you know, so you need to think about that too. That's the other side. You know, no one's complaining about these 8 that are out there that you can't have a beer on now. Just make that comment.
Okay. The next proposed amendment deals with the driving and rallying disturbance of waterfowl. We now have a sandhill crane season, so we're simply adding cranes to this section, basically housekeeping. The next section is housekeeping as well. Over the last couple of years, we've been going through and deleting the word bore out of proclamations and rules and regs, and this is the first time this one's been open, so we are deleting bore as well from this one. The next section deals with overnight camping on WMAs. The basic rule is staying the same. We are requesting now that people who are camping leave their name, phone number, address, TWRA ID, and date of arrival must be displayed on the camper, the tent, the vehicle, etc. What we're running into is people spending extended time camping on our WMAs, these, you know, months. So this would address that. Section C there, houseboats and anchoring and mooring was once prohibited on the shoreline of Chuck Swan and Cove Creek. Now we're going to allow that from the 3rd Thursday of May through the 2nd Tuesday of September. But they can't block access to coves, or mooring lines can't be in the way or block access to coves.
What's the reason for the particular time period that's chosen there?
Yeah.
It's the peak boating time when the demand for that ability has been presented to us, and we're okay with this for those time periods.
And the last addition to this rule deals with horses and horseback riding. Currently, horseback riding is allowed on wildlife management areas on roads open to motorized vehicles and designated trails. In the spring of 2012, we started receiving complaints from turkey hunters on Laurel Hill WMA that horseback riders were disturbing their hunts. And we polled the other WMAs in Region 2, and for example, Bear Hollow Mountain has a horse trail, but they're not having any conflict. Percy Priest and Old Hickory is core land. ADC is multi-use federal land. Yanali, when I talked to Tommy, he had gotten complaints from hunters where horses were disrupting their hunts. So how we've addressed this, again, there are these, in Section 4 there, these WMAs, primarily smaller WMAs, where people aren't present all the time. The road system may not be extensive. So we're essentially asking that horses not be allowed at all on those WMAs. In Section 5, we're asking that those WMAs, Prentice Cooper, Catoosa, Cheatham, Haynes, Tellico Lake, Laurel Hill, Williamsport, and Yanali, that horse riding and be prohibited during big game seasons only. And that would address the issues with hunting. Here's a chart of those. If you look, and this is the 2013-2014 season, so this is last year, or last fall, and this year's turkey numbers. But total big game days are less than still the available horse days if this rule would pass as it is. So you can still ride horses on the WMA longer or more days than big game hunting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about, kind of along the same lines of the conversation earlier in terms of how these were identified. I know that through the regional conversation processes, you've identified these, but are there active issues occurring? Has there been due diligence to work with the multi-use and the multi-users of the property? But complete bans seem like a pretty heavy hand.
Well,
and so I'm wondering if there's an issue that has made that heavy hand a justifiable action.
The complete ban, and let me go back up here. On these they're smaller WMAs, nobody's assigned to that WMA to patrol it daily. And to be honest with you, horses cause an environmental impact. There's the soil erosion, the gullying that goes along with that. And to be honest, again, in the summertime, some of these smaller WMAs don't get frequented by officers or our personnel very often because they have other things they're doing. And it's just our feeling that to protect them, they're smaller, the road system's not extensive, that we just eliminate horses, and be clear, eliminate horses up front.
And so, but what I didn't hear you say is that there is an active issue.
On the smaller
on
ones, no.
these.
I'm sorry, on the smaller ones, no. On the larger ones, yes.
It feels a little, I very much understand the erosion issues, very much understand the challenge of law enforcement and thinning responsibilities, and also sort of the responsibilities ultimately we have to the license holders and the sportsmen in this. I'm a little concerned that we're going to have a ban where there's not an issue yet. I haven't heard that there's an issue, and so knowing the conversations we've had in the short time I've been on the commission and how much that impacts local conversations with those folks who might be responsibly using, it feels heavy-ish.
And two, I guess one of the things we think about, the issue we had on Laurel Hill in the spring of 2012, it's taken 2 years now to get here. So it's not something that once a problem does arise that we can address, with any kind of real speed.
Right. Thank you.
Is this in part a safety issue? I mean, is it, are we worried about disturbing somebody who's calling up a gobbler, or are we worried about somebody mistaking a horse for a deer.
Both. I have talked to a turkey hunter who was upset that his hunt was disturbed by a horseback rider, but he said the fact that, he heard the noise and that attracted his attention. He got keyed up, and it turned out to be a horse. So as far as I know, we've not had any kind of issues with hunters shooting horseback riders or anything. But just the fact, our impetus is we're having hunters being disturbed while they're hunting.
I'd like to say something. I mean, these are WMAs supported by hunting and fishing licensed dollars, and they're getting more days than our hunting and fishing people are. So, I think these WMAs were constructed and developed for hunters. So I disagree. I think they don't need to be in there during hunting seasons. Now, I don't know about the other areas when there's, the ones that you close down full time. That's y'all's decision if it's an environmental problem. But these are people that are using our WMAs and they're not contributing anything. So I'm solid in this and our support for what the agency's wanting to do.
I was going to say, I would also support, obviously, during hunting seasons, and if it's an issue to patrol some of these smaller issues, I realize you guys are stretched thin. Could we, instead of banning altogether, could we just find certain dates where people like to use the WMA for horseback riding, that we had actually a certain timetable that it was legal to do, and that would minimize the impact because there would be fewer days that they were allowed. It would also let the agency know during this time period it might be worth, checking, even if it's a month in the summer or whenever they would like to ride,
Well,
like we do every other user group.
In the smaller areas, the road systems aren't that developed. We take care of our own roads. So when our roads need maintenance, we're the ones that have to do that. Right now, horseback riding on roads and designated trails is permitted. So we're trying to preempt an issue, to be honest.
John Gregory, Region 4 Manager. I want to make at least one of the one that we have up there, Foothills Wildlife Management Area. When we acquired that land 15 years ago, whenever it was, there was a deed restriction put on there that all hoofed animals could not, and it's never been in the rules. So that's one of the reasons Foothills is there. And talking with Kirk Miles, there are some other on those WMAs where it was agreed to on the acquisition side that there'd be some of these restrictions, and they're getting into the list in the rule officially by this process. Environmentally, we have a lot of wetlands on those small tracts are wetlands, so they're in this high erodible soils in places. So I think there are some environmental reasons. Those aren't in my region, so I'll let somebody else explain if you want to ask those questions, but there is a mixture of both environmental and deed restrictions or agreements when we acquired the land.
Great. John, thank you. That's really helpful. And that makes perfect sense to me. Prior to a problem occurring, having a heavy hand, and I actually think that big game, having there be a separation during a big game season makes tremendous sense. That's a way to balance the important needs of multiple users, but I'm just struggling with the heavy hand where there's not a deed restriction, there's not an issue. There's just the possibility of a future issue. That's what I'm struggling with. But a deed restriction makes perfect sense. I just circled Foothills to make sure that sticks in my mind, that that's a priority. And I'm sure that there are other reasons, but it's sort of the prospects of an issue doesn't feel like it rises to the level of a total prohibition. But I very much appreciate that's very, very helpful. And all of this conversation is very helpful for me.
Yeah, I think I would almost like to see which of these areas have deed restrictions. That feels pretty cut and dry to me. And which of these areas, from an environmental standpoint, can't withstand or shouldn't have any horseback or hooved animal activity, and then which ones, you know, it could be possible to provide some opportunity. We have a lot of user groups on our WMAs, and obviously, hopefully at some point, they'll all be helping to support this agency, and it makes me nervous to totally ban areas if there is some availability for that use, even if it's limited.
Well, and let me add this, when we allow horseback riding on trails, we will have maintenance. That will be something this agency is gonna have to do, is maintain those trails.
Yeah, let me ask a question. We've got a couple of issues with this rule. If this rule is rolled till August, is there anything in here that is going to be, that we need to pass today because it's an immediate need for June, July, August, September? Or is it gonna delay it to the point that it won't take effect till after turkey season next year? Or anything like that? I mean, just for information.
Well, based on what Cheryl and the director said, it could be anywhere from 60 days to several months to get it done. I don't really know how to answer that
Okay.
for you.
That's fine.
The variable on how much time it takes a rule to go into effect is the Attorney General's office. They are in the process of reviewing rule when it's filed with the Secretary of State's office. They can take a day to review it, they can take a year to review it. So that's the variable. Otherwise, it can usually be done in 6 to 8 months. And, you know, and in certain cases, we can tell the Attorney General, we can call them up and say, would you please try to rush this through because we want it in. And we can do everything we can to get it done as quickly as possible. But that's the variable. That's why we have a hard time telling you exactly how long it would take a rule.
I understand. If is in this rule, if we amended this to leave in only the areas that were deed restricted and remove the rest in that language, or do we have to be specific when this passes, which ones are included?
You need to be specific.
Well, then y'all need to tell us which ones are deed restricted.
Yeah.
Like Trey said, I think.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We're not having a meeting in May, are we? This can be rolled to May if you want to. Keep in mind, though, that the way the law is written regarding rulemaking hearings, if there are any mildly significant changes to the way it's filed and presented today, it will have to be done all over again anyway. You have to have a whole new rulemaking hearing and refiling. So, but yes, you can move it to May. You can roll the whole thing to May.
Cheryl, can I take a stab at an amendment or presenting this? No, don't do that, 'cause I'm looking at you.
That's your prerogative. That's what that means.
That's prerogative, but then you gotta tell me, no, you can't, slap my hand. I would like to make a motion that we go forward with a rule-making hearing, adopting the amendments with the following exception. I would ask that we remove Rule 1660-04-14-03 regarding the use of alcohol beverages on WMAs. I ask that to be deleted in full at this time. And amendment.
Would you repeat the number again? You had a couple of numbers off. I want to make sure the record.
1660-01-14-03. I'm assuming subparagraph 3. And then the second, this is a change to the wording, and that is under Amendment 1660-01-14-13, subparagraph 5, regarding the horses on WMAs. Under the proposed paragraph 4, I would ask that to be amended to read, horses and other saddle and pack animals are prohibited during big game seasons, taking out the words at all times on, and the rest of the WMA would, the rest of the listing of the WMAs would still apply.
May I ask a
With
clarification?
with respect to the deed restrictions, I would ask that be a separate matter that come to us where the deed restrictions are, and I think the commission's more than happy to adopt it. Unless, John, I'm gonna lean to you. Would you like us to include that one WMA?
What about some HGL lands, the highly erodible?
We don't know what those are right now, and I'm trying to get this narrowed down. Or else we could delete that paragraph in the total right now, but it feels too heavy-handed to me. At least that's my amendment.
I guess my answer to that, Commissioner, would be that, you know, we've been dealing with it when we've had the calls about wanting to go, by explaining the deed restrictions. It just kind of ties our enforcement arm if we get somebody that makes the decision to go ahead and do it without being there, but sounds like you're gonna be revisiting this rule relatively soon, maybe. So whatever your will is, we can deal with the situation. It's been there for quite a while.
Don't you just put foothills in there at all times and address that today, and then the rest of it go with us?
Okay.
That's the one.
Is this foothills? Is that
Yes.
correct?
Well, for me, Kirk has mentioned that there's others
That are on
you know,
deed
he knows right
restriction?
now that
Good.
have-
If y'all give us that
Tell-
list, we
tell
can
it.
deal with that right now.
Fire away.
Bridgestone, Firestone, for sure, Oak Ridge, WMA, fairly positive.
That's DOE, that'd be
DOE, that's DOE. Those are the two I know for sure. I would respectfully ask, and Commissioner Bledsoe kind of mentioned this, the other ones that we have in there are areas that I have environmental concerns. UG Refuge is one that we specifically have highly erodible. Their soils identified by NRCS as highly erodible soils. And we've kept horses off there without having it in the rule, explaining to people just that. Some of the other areas that we have on there are wetland areas, like Chickamauga, Hiawassee, we have wetlands in that area. So, the ones that we have, Region 3 has in that list, are basically ones that we had deed restrictions on, or working with my managers, we felt there were environmental concerns that we wanted to protect those particular areas. So I don't know how the deed restriction is pretty cut and dry. I don't know how the commission would want us to present what you would need to deem it of an environmental.
On these areas that are environmentally sensitive, are the horses already there? Are they using it, or are y'all keeping them off?
In some cases, they're there, but we're not having extreme issues. I'm not in no way painting that picture.
Let me do this. Excuse me, Kirk. Let me do this. I've got an amendment that I was proposing. Let me rescind that amendment and make the motion that we roll this rulemaking to next month so we can clarify some of these things. Because the more we talk, the more information comes out, and we need to get all the information on the table. So my motion is to postpone this until the May meeting.
I like that, because I think we need to be respectful of our biologists and our managers to determine if we're going to start allowing horseback riding where it's not been, and they can make that decision that it's going to destroy the property. We want to get involved in that with having high maintenance issues and all. We've got to respect what they're saying.
We don't have a choice if they're deed restricted, so we need to know absolutely which ones are deed restricted, because we're contractually bound to enforce those covenants that are contained in our deeds or otherwise recorded. So we need to know about that, and then that's an easy answer there, I imagine. And then we can look at the environmental impacts on others and so forth.
Hold on just a second. I've got a motion and I've got a second, but what I'd like to do is keep this discussion going, and let's give the agency a little direction, and let's go ahead and talk this out. So I've got a motion second, and we'll just go with discussion right here.
Mr. Chairman, if I could say one more thing. Was it your position that on the ones where we would be prohibiting horses at all times, that in every case, there is either an environmental issue or there is a deed restriction.
I don't think they can.
Um,
Bad
Yes,
enough
sir,
to-
on the region, I'm speaking for Region 3, I'm obviously Region 3 Program Manager, but yes, sir, on the Region 3 WMAs that are on that list in the top level are ones that are either deed restricted or that we felt needed more protection.
Needed protection to
Well,
enhance the ability of hunters to come in and walk the trails, or needed
no,
additional protection?
primarily environmental
Okay.
concerns, like highly erodible soils on Uchee for sure. Chickamauga, it has some islands, you know, I don't think you could get horses to, but other than that, it has a lot of small wetland areas. So that type of concern. It's either, basically the ones we have in that top list are either deed restricted or they're areas that we felt environmentally we needed to protect them.
Okay, you say that's true for Region 3, I'm sorry.
No, please.
But is that true for the other areas that are in other regions?
That I don't know.
John, you're shaking your head, so I... Yeah, and that's foothills, okay.
It seems to be,
Go ahead, Trey.
it seems it'd be appropriate to have a breakdown of these areas, because for commissioners to get calls or whoever and say, hey, we used to ride here and now we can't, for us to say it's environmental issues, and they say, well, and they disagree, you know, it'd just be nice for us to be able to say, well, there's a certain class of erodible soils and there's this amount of wet, you know, information, so we can make a more educated decision on these.
With, the purpose of me postponing is to allow staff as a whole to come back. I think you're hearing, tell us what's happening specifically on these WMAs that asked you to put it on the list. It began as they're remote, officers getting there. That's how it started, and I respect that. I truly do. Now we have some deed restrictions. We have some environmental concerns. Help us, because we've been painting with a paint roller. We need a little bit of a finer paintbrush on these. For us, and I think for the public to understand why we're taking this action. With respect to the alcohol, I can only speak for me personally. My hope is that we can come up with something that may be a little fair to, you've heard the family factor concern. And so let's see if we can't help that a little bit. And my hope is 30 days will do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would just ask, in terms of that specific information, I don't know if it's via email to members of the commission well ahead of that time, but that information in table form, who's currently using for multi-use, who's not, what's deed restricted, what's not, what's the erosion issue, what's not, what's an issue of remoteness or trails or whatever the issues are. That could be a one-page graph that could help those calls, and certainly help those of us who are district representatives who will likely field those calls, help us understand it a little bit better. So I greatly appreciate that.
But, well, you pretty much, what I was going to ask you pretty much have just done. I was going to ask you if you'd consider rolling the rule until the May meeting so that we could come back with whatever answers you have. And as you suggested, it would really help us if you continue on with the discussion here so that we know what those issues are, and we can come back in May and address those individually and ahead of time, as you suggest, Commissioner Woods.
I have a question. Is there any user fees for the horses on these WMAs?
No,
They
ma'am.
don't contribute to any?
At this point, no.
Further questions from the commission? Anyone else in the audience with the agency or audience? Director Carter, I agree with having the information for each commissioner and also the justification of why. And if you would, and I'm like Commissioner Woods, an email would be fine, but make sure that we get it quicker than a day or two before the commission meeting. I would like to have it. You feel like you could have it in the next week or two, or?
what is today? If we'll have our staff meeting in May, first Monday in May, if we could give it to you shortly after that, certainly by the second week of May.
That'd be fine, just as quick as we could.
And one last little issue, and we'll address this in the email. If it's on an area that was bought with hunting and fishing money, whether it's federal or state, we cannot use any of that money for maintenance on anything except hunting and fishing programs. We're absolutely prohibited from that. So we'd have to address whatever we're going to do in the way of maintenance, regardless of the use, whether it's hiking, camping, fishing, whatever it is. We've got the hunting, fishing side covered, but if it's anything outside hunting, fishing, boating, we have no way to fund that. So we'll have to address that except we do have a few exceptions on some of the areas we could on different, but if it's bought hunting, fishing money, just wanted you to know that's a thing we'll factor in, but we'll let you know that as well.
Could you include the size, acreage-wise, of each of the WMAs? Because I know, so we have some that are awfully small,
Yes.
don't we? Could you do that?
Sure.
All right.
There's another consideration in your discussions. Right now, I agree exactly with former Chairman Dr. McMillan, that these user groups don't pay anything, but the intent is perhaps that one day they will, and they will want to use where they possibly can. So if not just these areas, other areas. And I know Alan hadn't hit his feet, but West Tennessee's all highly erodible, and we do have horses in Shelby Forest and things like that. But that's a consideration. At some point, these people will be paying money to maintain trails and things like that. So,
yes, sir.
Campers litter and horses have to be maintained and littered,
Judge Carter, is there any questions that staff has for the commission with guidance or direction? Is there any other thing that you can think of?
Is there any section of the rule we haven't addressed so far?
One last question, and I know we're raking this one pretty good. My apologies. This is back to the use on alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to, and it was pretty clear that this is about use. This is not about possession. But in terms of possession, if someone's got a cooler of beer, but they're not drinking a beer, that's not going to apply in this rule or other rules? So possession is not being considered under this rule at all?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any more discussion? All right, now, the motion on the floor is to roll this to the May meeting. And Ms. Barbara, roll call vote. Wait, one more, hold on.
I apologize. This, I guess, is directed to Cheryl. How much of this can we amend or change without having to file a new? And I probably should know.
Well, no, I don't know that you should, because it's kind of hard to describe. Basically, what the Attorney General looks at is whether the public had adequate notice that something might be done to the area they're concerned about. So the public obviously has notice that horseback riding on certain WMAs is being considered. So they have the ability to come here and voice their concerns and take part. It would be if you went off the wall and tried to do something with some other activity like swimming. Swimmers don't know that you're doing that, so that would be determined to be outside the scope. So it's got to be, right, you can subtract from this rule. What they look at is significant change from what was presented. And they look at, does the public have enough notice so that if they were concerned about an issue, they would be here to speak about that subject.
I'm still not clear. So can we pass part of this, like the harassing waterfowl portion of it? Can we pass that and roll the other sections?
You know, I've never known that to be done. I've
Okay.
never known that to be
Okay.
done.
We just roll
So
those.
I don't know the answers. It's
Yeah.
never been done.
In the list that you're going to give us, can you point out the ones that have previously allowed horseback riding that were getting ready to close versus the ones that have never had it?
Okay, are we done on discussion? Motion on the floor is to roll to the May meeting. Ms. Barber, call the roll.
Jim Bledsoe. Harold Cannon. Bill Cox.
Aye.
Jeff Griggs. Connie King.
Aye.
Jeff McMillan. Tom Rice. Jim Ripley.
Aye.
James Stroud. Trey Teague. David Watson. Jamie Woodson.
Okay. Motion passes to roll it to the May meeting, and this concludes this rulemaking hearing. Does anybody want to take a break? All right, 15-minute break.